Lead us not into temptation. We can find it all by ourselves. Today, Adam is led into temptation. Jesus is led into temptation. We are led into temptation. The question is, how do we respond? Like Adam or like Jesus?
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. At that time, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. He fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was hungry. The tempter approached and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become loaves of bread." He said in reply, "It is written, 'One does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes forth from the mouth of God.'" Then the devil took him to the holy city and made him stand at the parapet of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, 'He will command his angels concerning you, and with their hands they will support you, lest you dash your foot against a stone.'" Jesus answered him, "Again it is written, 'You shall not put the Lord your God to the test.'" Then the devil took him up to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in their magnificence. And he said to them, "All these I shall give to you if you will prostrate yourself and worship me." At this Jesus said to him, "Get away, Satan. It is written, 'The Lord your God shall you worship, and him alone shall you serve.'" Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
When I was a kid, every time I saw a Laurel and Hardy movie, somewhere along the line in every movie, Ollie would turn to Stan, he'd twiddle with his tie, and he'd say, "Another fine mess you've gotten us into." Well, here we are, in another fine mess. And it's not just we who are here or in the church or in the States. It seems to be a pandemic, and the pandemic seems to be this: us versus them. The good guys versus the bad guys. And the sense of we is gone. Well, first of all, how did we get there? And there is more oppositional power and oppositional energy than I've ever experienced before. And once we're there, can there be a way out? Is there something else we can do? And is there really someone to blame for the situation we're in? And I want to say, yeah. Flip Wilson told us who it was. The devil made me do it. The devil indeed is active. Now, we don't picture a red person with a little beard and a pitchfork. But there is evil in the world. And to deny evil in the world is the height of foolishness, because all we need to do is open our eyes, and the evidence is everywhere between the anger and the hatred and the violence and the wars and the famines. And it just goes on and on and on. Another fine mess we're in. And the question is, how do we get there? And is there a way out? And I think to understand that, we need to literally go back to the beginnings. And today we've got this marvelous passage from Genesis, this wonderful mythical story about Adam and Eve and the serpent. And I want to say something about mythical stories. They may be ahistorical. In other words, they may not have happened exactly literally the way they are presented. Matter of fact, I'm sure that they didn't. But they reveal a great truth. And it is imperative for us to understand what that truth is. So how does it begin? It begins in paradise. You know, the opening chapters of the book of Genesis doesn't have God creating a desert, doesn't have him creating a cesspool. He's got him creating a garden, a magnificent, beautiful garden. And in this garden, there's all kinds of diversity. There's all kinds of animals and plants, and it's beautiful. And everybody seems to be getting along. There's a special consciousness, and it's an innocent consciousness for all of the animals, because there is not either predator or prey. And even Adam, when he sees and beholds Eve for the very first time, has this wonderful unitive consciousness. There's no separation from Adam and Eve. They literally are one. Because he looks at her and he says, "This at last is flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone, and the two have become one." Oh, that's how it begins. That's how it begins. And God, in all of this extravagance, tells them you can eat anything you want to, you can do anything you want to, you are utterly free. Just one thing. There's just one thing I don't want you to go near because it will be your downfall. And the one thing is to eat from this fruit of a tree, of the knowledge of what is good and what is evil. Don't eat from that. Well, then the tempter comes along. And the tempter is always there. And the tempter is going to tempt Eve and say to begin with some doubt. Did God really say you shouldn't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? She says, no, we can't because we'll die. He says, oh, you certainly shall not die. Now, the prince of lies is about to lay a huge lie because they're going to die. They're going to die. And then he's going to say something else. And this part is semi-true. You will become like God. Now, if God is the author of all goodness, then God will decide what is good and what is not good. What she is about to do is usurp God's power, to take it to herself. I'll decide what's good and not's good. I'll decide who's good and who's bad. I will have the power of God. And so she eats of the fruit and she finds that it's good and yummy, and she gives it to her husband. She gives it to Adam, and he eats of it, and immediately they've got a power of God. Their eyes are opened. And what's the first thing they notice? They're naked. They're naked. And they're ashamed. And they begin to cover themselves up. And when God finally shows up later in the story and he says, what's going on here? And Adam says, I hid myself because I was ashamed. He said, who told you you were naked? I didn't tell you. And then Adam immediately does what evil does. It's not my fault. She made me do it. And what does she say? The devil made me do it. That is what's called satanic. Satan, the word Satan means the one who is accusing, the accuser, the blamer. It's your fault. You made me do it. The other thing that the power of evil does is divide. It's called diabolic. Diabolos means to cut up, to divide, to separate. So it's dividing and conquer. Now this man, this woman the battle of the sexes is about to begin. Because they notice that they are different. They are not the same. They find themselves at loggerheads with each other and fighting with each other. And that's the first disobedience. They didn't listen to God. They wanted to be like God. They wanted to be in control. And I will decide who's good and who's bad, who's right and who's wrong, who's in and who's out. And this is passed along. It's called the original sin because it doesn't end with Adam. He passes it on to Cain and Abel. And Cain and Abel pass it on, now not just to themselves, but to their tribe. And so now we have not just one person against another person, accusing, blaming, and separating, but now we have tribes accusing, blaming, and separating. We're the good ones. Well, if we're the good ones, then you must be the bad ones. If we are right, then you must be wrong. And so we have, down through all generations up into our present day, this incredible division between the Israelites and then the Philistines and then Rome and the Jews and to the Montagues and the Capulets, to the whites and the blacks, the rich and the poor, to the conservatives and liberals. It's gone all the way down to our headlines of yesterday, the coronavirus. Now, this virus doesn't know any politics. This virus doesn't know any boundaries or borders. And yet, what have we done? We've politicized it on both sides. We're all right, and you're all wrong. No, we're all right, and you're all wrong. We got a name for that. It's evil. It's tearing us apart. It's tearing us apart. Is there no cure for this diabolical encounter that we are having with each other and with our world? If there is sin, and obviously there is, what's the cure? And I want to tell you, there is a cure for our dis-ease, for our disobedience. St. Paul, in this masterpiece, if you've never studied Paul's letter to the Romans, spend some time with it. It is an utter masterpiece. And today he is saying, here's how sin entered. It entered through the disobedience of one man. Now the name Adam, remember we're talking about mythical language. Adam means humankind. It doesn't mean just this one individual. So humankind rebelled against God, and humankind wanted to be in charge of everything. So sin entered the world through one man, and it went down from generation to generation to generation, down to our time in his disobedience. But in the fullness of time, God sent his only Son, another man. Only this is the new Adam. This is the old Adam who was tempted and fell. This is the new Adam who's also going to be tempted. He's not going to fall. He's got a name. His name is Jesus. And he's got a title. His title is the Christ. The Christ is the one who is anointed. The Christ is the one who is in communion with God. Well, Jesus was just one man, but the Christ, well, I'm looking at the Christ. You're the Christ. You're the body of Christ. In space and time, you are the Christ. That's good, solid, Orthodox Catholic theology. Now, that means whatever the Christ was able to do, we can do. We got the power. We have to simply make a choice between following the disobedience of Adam or following the obedience of the Christ. And what does the obedience of the Christ look like? Well, he comes into the same situation that Adam came in. The tempter is coming after him. You see, Jesus is baptized in the Jordan. He comes out of the Jordan. The skies open up. He hears the voice of God say, "You are my son. You're my beloved." Now, what does it mean to be the beloved of God? What does it look like? If you are God now in the flesh, how does God act in the world? If you're going to be the emissary of God with the full power of God, how is that power manifested? Now, to discern that, he goes into the desert and he fasts for 40 days. Why do you fast? We fast because when you fast, you wake up. When you're fasting, when you're hungry, you're paying a whole lot of attention to a whole bunch of stuff. And of course, one of the things you're really paying attention to is your stomach because you're really hungry. And so after 40 days, and again, we're still thinking in mythical language. If he actually fasted for 40 days and took nothing to drink for 40 days, well, you're not going to stay alive. So symbolically, he's really hungry. No. Physically, he's really hungry. And the tempter comes back. And what does he do? Same thing that he does with Eve. Did God really tell you that? Well, the tempter this time goes to Jesus. He says, if you really are the Son of God, if you got the power of God, then you could take these stones and turn them into loaves of bread. Now, here's the question for Jesus. Of course he can turn them into loaves of bread. He's got the power of God. But he won't do it. Is it possible to be the beloved? To be the beloved and still be hungry? Is it possible? And the answer obviously is yes. And then he takes him to the parapet of the temple and he says, throw yourself down because the angels will lift you up lest you dash your foot against the stone. If you're the beloved of God, nothing terrible should ever happen to you. You are God's chosen ones. You are God's special ones. You don't get cancer. You don't get sick. You don't get the virus. Oh, yes, you do. And so he's saying, don't go there. Now, what's the ultimate temptation? He shows him all the kingdoms of the world. Of the world. He says, all these are yours if you bow down and worship me. Now, let me tell you something. The devil can give them to you. He really can. He's the prince of this world. What does it merit a person to gain the whole world and lose his immortal soul? Well, you can gain the whole world. All you got to do is follow his lead. And how do you get power? You divide and you conquer. You say, this is the good group, that's the bad group. You accuse one group, and then you blame the other for everything. You do that, you're on your way up. You're on your way up. Jesus isn't going to go there. Satan does own the world. He is the prince of this world. But Jesus has another kingdom. And this kingdom is the one he is going to proclaim. And it's a kingdom where God in the flesh is about to do what God can do, and it's the only thing he can do. What's the only thing he can do? Well, there's one last temptation. The last temptation of Christ is when he's up there on the cross. And everybody's yelling at him, well, if you are the Son of God, if you really are, come down off that cross. He doesn't come down. Why? He's got the power. Why? Because he knows something we need to learn, and that is obedience to God. And obedience to God means that you are to exercise the God-like quality you've got inside of yourself. The God-like quality he had inside of himself was to give the only thing he had to give. The only thing God has to give, even when dying on the cross, is forgiveness, reconciliation, love. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. That's the new Adam. Guess in whom the new Adam dwells. It's in this church. We've got the power. We've got the power literally to change the world. We do not have to fall into the trap of hatred and resentment and anger and blaming and accusing and going in black and white and being hardline and hardcore. We don't have to do that. Jesus saw what in everybody who was killing him and accusing him? He saw the divine, for the Christ was in them as the Christ was in him. That's our holy work. I'm telling you, it's work. To see through the eyes of Jesus and then to do what Jesus did, especially in the midst of the situation, the mess we find ourselves in today. Because, as the old saying goes, there's so much bad in the best of us and so much good in the worst of us, that it hardly behooves any of us to complain about the rest of us. Now, we're going to be tempted. This is the season that we are led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted. The question is, which Adam are we going to follow?